I first met the the Tarahumara or Raramuri people um, because I had just come back from Mexico visiting the Kumeyaay and the Pai Pai in northern Baja. My friends that I was with, Dave Westcott and Steve Watts, wanted to visit my mother on our way north from that. And while at my mother's house in Tucson, Steve saw an article in the Tucson Weekly on the laying on my mother's table, and it had uh, two young Tarahumara girls on the front cover. And then we looked at the Tucson Citizen of the paper that comes, I think, in the evening, and it also had those same two girls on the front cover, and it had a caption that said, "When asked why they were smiling, they responded, 'Because we've eaten today.'" And they were dressed so colorfully and such different looking people that Steve said, let's read the article and see if we can contact the people that brought them here. And so we did, and it said, contact this number if you want to know more. And so we did, and we got invited to the house of a man that lived up in the Tucson mountains, and all the Tarahumaras were there living in his backyard and sleeping in his living room. And they were like, I mean, I'm talking about all the people that ran that day in the marathon. They were all at his house. And so we got to know them a little bit. They told us they were there to alert the rest of the world that they were in trouble because of years of drought, that there was a lot of hardship, that their farming practices were hard to keep up because they were rain-dependent farmers. And so they just let us know that they were there to try to generate money and get some news out to the rest of the world that they're in trouble, that they need help. So I began to talk to them and tell them that I was born in that town, and that I officially, as a Tucsonian, let them know that I was really grateful that they made the effort to come all that way. And is there anything we could do to make their trip better, or is there anything they'd like to take home to their families? And they all began to speak to each other in their own native tongue. And after a long discussion, the leader came up and said, we would like cloth to take back to our wives. The next day, we went to Hancock Fabrics in Tucson with that article and that photograph of those girls. And I showed the lady at the register, I said, would you be able to donate or give us a good price on a lot of good cloth that looks like this? Hancock Fabrics gave me and my nieces and nephews a lot of cloth. And we drove up to that house, walked in there, and presented that cloth to them and thanked them for coming to our community and enriching our lives. And they all got in a big long line and came by one and shook our hands. And then the leader of that group, Felipe Torres, came up and he grabbed both of my hands with his hands and he said, I have come to your town, your village. You need to come visit me in my village now. And I promised him that I would. Well, I didn't know what that meant at that point in my life. I had never been to Copper Canyon and I did not know how to get there. But I asked Rick Fisher for a bunch of information and he gave me wrote on a piece of paper a bunch of names. He said, go to Creel and then go to Kirare and then ask people where Wimaibo is. After a year of searching around and trying to figure out how to get there, I got to Creel and nobody had heard of it. Either I was pronouncing it wrong or back in those days nobody knew where that was. Finally, I met a woman named Maria and her husband Ernesto from Kirare, and they said that their son could take us to the top of the canyon and point to us where the village was, and then he had to get back because it took half a day to get there. That means it'd take him a half a day to get back, and they didn't want him walking around in the dark. We made it in, and that began a friendship that's now lasted, if that was around 1990 something, it's been a lot of years now since we've been friends. I began to learn that the Tarahumaras that I knew were interested in having a future that they had something to say about, that they could move into the modern world on their terms and not not at the speed that it was coming at them, but that they could have what they wanted. When I got to Wimaibo, I began to ask them what they wanted after getting to know them, and they said, we would like a school where kids can go to school for the first few years of their life and learn from a teacher that knows both languages, from a woman, especially somebody from their village that already knows them and likes them and would nurture them so that they can get a good feeling for school before they go off to boarding schools. So that they would like education already and know Spanish already and know about Mexican culture outside of their villages before they got sent away from home. And so, or had to walk, you know, a long ways to an all non-native school. So the people in Wimaibo said, well, we can build our own school. What we don't have the money for is teachers. And so I went around Tucson asking different churches during the sanctuary movement time. You know, I'd met a lot of good people. So I went to places like Southside Presbyterian in Tucson and just told them what the project was. And had a lot of wealthy women come up and say, if you can show me pictures of the school and that it's built and that people are ready to teach, show me photographs, I'll start funding the teachers. Well, because Wimaibo is a consensus government, and so are all the other native villages in the Sierra Tarahumara, it might take them 9 years to get to where they all decide to say yes about something. And that's exactly how long it took. Bottom line is, by the time they got around to deciding to do it, a lot of things had changed in our economy and people weren't as willing to participate. But also, I let them know that we would like to somehow generate employment so that something that they did would pay for the teachers' wages instead of just having it being donated by people. And they liked that idea that somebody wasn't going to play Santa Claus or welfare on them. So the Tarahumara people of the Wimaibo village said, well, bring in hikers. Bring people in hiking, and we'll have a house for them to stay on, and we'll charge them 50 pesos a night to stay there, and we'll make tortillas and beans for them. And so then we'll take that money and pay the school teachers. There'll be girls from our village who, if they're going to spend their days teaching, they can't be working. So if they can't work, we got to pay them some for their time. So we'll do that. And so I began to go around asking people if they want to go hiking in Copper Canyon, and not being a good salesman or businessman, I could generate about 4 trips a year, and people donated a lot. And some men went ahead and just built the school anyway in town, and slowly went around getting help from other venues, and now they have a kindergarten built, and like day school type teachers to teach in there from their own energy. And we donated lots of money over and over again, and seems to be functioning now. So lots of people got involved. Other Americans came through that we didn't know. We never could get their numbers or names correctly. Everybody knows your first name and nobody knows your last name. People don't like consensuses until everyone decides to have one. So there's always a lot of talk and opposing views about how we don't want people coming in. We learned over the years that the beautiful Shangri-La around here is basically not quite like it looks. Everybody's making some kind of clandestine money. So for a lot of factors, partially just culturally, people weren't really necessarily ready to jump into the modern world of education and all that. They wanted their kids to speak Spanish and learn to read and write, but they weren't necessarily into becoming modernized. And so a lot of people found out that they could make money doing something else, mostly growing, marijuana for somebody. Just lots of big money coming in from groups around them that weren't into improving their lives at all. And so families just things moved kind of slow, and things are still moving really slow. People have to decide, one family at a time if they want to stay out of that easy money. And so we've slowly collected over the years a lot of people that are patriots to their people. They love uh, to make their lives better and help other people do the same. But because they don't grow marijuana or participate in the trade at all or in any of the drug trades, they're, you know, trying to make a living honestly in in a hard to make a living kind of place. So they love to farm, and when the rain comes, they eat good, and when the rain doesn't come for about 3 or 4 years, they're back to doing crafts or whatever they got to do to make it. And so that seems to be the kind of people that like us and invite us into their lives, and they're the kind of people we want to be with. And so they've slowly heard from each other over the years who we are, and they keep inviting us to their villages. And so we've gained friendships with about 3 other villages now, and feeling pretty good at this point. I'm feeling really good about our friendships, that they're genuine and they're people that know we uh, come to just see how they're doing and want to learn from them. And so a new idea that hadn't been tried in most places in Mexico was to treat people like they had something we needed, like that their knowledge of how to live on the land had been so thoroughly lost by our culture that they had a valuable skill that we could pay them well if they would teach us how to do things. So at one point, while working for Boss had changed hands and was then belonged to Josh Bernstein. Uh, their logo said that one of the things that Boss was about was preserving culture. And nobody at Boss knew anybody that knew any Native Americans anywhere except me. So Westcott and I had already started a trip with the Seri, the Concac people of Sonora on Tiburon Island, and so we knew that that idea of telling somebody that they had valuable knowledge that we needed and then paying them well for teaching us really worked well with the Seri. And so we had a good relationship with them. And so I told Josh Bernstein, let's do the same thing for a village here in Mexico, in the Sierra Tarahumara, that had been already kind of, for lack of better words, culturally raped by the Spanish, the Catholic Church, the Christian churches, all those people who claimed to make their life better, that they had no sense of who they were culturally. They kind of embarrassed about themselves. They were poor. They lived by the highway, and they just kind of lost their sense of self-respect. And so I knew we couldn't harm a healthy village, but we might be able to help an ailing village by giving them jobs to become teachers of their culture. And so we picked a place that couldn't be harmed in case what we were doing was too obtrusive. So we went and asked them what would they rather do, and they didn't really care what we did. They just wanted money or jobs and help. So we said, well, why don't we go live in a cave for a week outside of that village and have you come up and teach us? So everybody that doesn't want to see our white faces in your town can avoid us, and everybody that wants to come look at us can come stare at us. So at one point we began to have classes where we would hire a male and a female from the village around us that knew particular skills that were male or female skills to come teach us in the morning and then in the afternoon. So we could get 4 couples, 4 people, 2 couples a day to come teach us skills every day for a week. And at the end of the week, we would have a big traditional fiesta and everybody would eat good. And they liked us so much after the first year that they said, we want to do this. We love what you're doing. We like what you're doing. So we lasted for a couple of years, and then I think Josh Bernstein said it was too expensive to maintain and pull the plug. But so I continue to this day to continue to try to do something that connects people with people. And so I haven't generated any businesses, but I have come and visited them at least 4 times a year for quite some time until our economy faded. And then when people began to be afraid of Mexico in our country, and when our government began saying it's too dangerous to travel here, then everything dropped off, and now nobody wants to come visit the Tarahumara. And so after our economy faded and our fear of travel in Mexico increased, and our sense of being isolated in the world as Americans because the terrorists are after us or whatever's happening, mentally people are uh, losing their faith that it's safe to travel in third world countries. But the, there's certain types of people that don't believe that or don't recognize that as anything new, and so there's some brave souls that still come visit. We've watched the villages that we were involved in, because of help from Americans and other people, slowly become more autonomous. Uh, except one of them. One of them has been taken over by drug lords, and everyone's afraid to live there. And the old-time inhabitants have all split because they don't want to be around that. But that's even loosened up in the last few years, so life's better all the way around. So there's one last village that we've had the pleasure of being invited to that still kind of keeps asking us to come back and still isn't thriving. That that we're trying to get to today. We're trying to find them because they want to have a consensus meeting about how to spend money that's been donated to their village. And there's been lots of good ideas brought up by them and others about how to do that, and they're trying to figure out a way to possibly generate income so that this money gets spent in something that they can maintain themselves and keep doing something. But we don't know what that is, and it's pretty tentative and pretty fragile at this point. And they ask us to come back in June specifically because it's the farthest from the harvest, meaning that they gathered in their bean and corns and squash and everything way back in September and October of last year. And June of this year, they say, is when people are usually in the most peril. June is when there's no rain. It's pretty dry. Things aren't coming up in the wild very well. There's not a lot of food anywhere, and it's a long time till they get to harvest in the fall. So they said, come back in June, we'll have a big meeting and we'll decide what to do. And so that's what we're doing.